අද්විතීය 200 Mbps ස්පීඩ් එකකින් ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ වේගවත්ම සහ පුළුල්තම හෝම් බ්‍රෝඩ්බෑන්ඩ් සම්බන්ධතාවය වන SLT Mobitel දේශයේ ෆයිබර් බලවේගය ඔබත් අදම අත්විඳින්න.
හරිම සුදුයි.
Tonight on First at 9, this Friday the 21st of April 2023. Remembrance. Catholic community in Sri Lanka commemorates 40 of lives lost during the tragic Easter Sunday terror attacks. Connectivity. President Ranil Wickremesinghe says that the government wants to make Sri Lanka an air and sea hub of the region.
Our intention is to make Sri Lanka an air sea hub. So we will have one Ministry of Shipping and Aviation.
Agreements signed to construct and operate the largest South Asia commercial and logistics hub in Sri Lanka.
The SLPA signed an agreement, investment agreement with China merchants and Sri Lankan entrepreneur to establish logistics center in the port of Colombo.
On the low, the National Consumer Price Index declines in March to 49.2%. Impaired. Sri Lanka's top lenders say debt restructuring will lead to capital impairment at banks.
Alliance Finance මෙතුරු රන්නයි සේවාවෙන් රන් පවුම්කට රුපියල් 1,70,000ක ඉහළ අතිකාරමක්.
ඔබේ විශ්වාසය දිනු සෙන්සුරයින් දැන් ළඟමැති ෆාමසියෙන් ලබාගත හැක.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9 with Andrew Bernard. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
A very good evening and welcome to AdaDerana 24's English News. In your top story for tonight, Sri Lanka commemorated the 4th anniversary of the deadly Easter Sunday terror attacks that claimed the lives of over 200 people in 2019 today. Special services were held in the morning in 3 churches that were targets of the suicide bombers. Addressing the main commemoration event, Archbishop of Colombo, His Eminence Malcolm Cardinal Ranjith, urged the government and the Attorney General to conduct a broader investigation without sticking to the recommendations of the Presidential Commission that was established to probe the Easter Sunday attacks. The Cardinal said that they are alert until justice is served to the victims of the attack. 4 years ago, on the 21st of April, Easter Sunday, 8 locations in Sri Lanka, including 3 churches located in Colombo, Negombo and Batticaloa, and 3 5-star hotels in Colombo became a target of suicide bombers who claimed the lives of around 272 innocent people engaging in religious activities and enjoying the festive spirit. The victims also included foreigners who were enjoying their visit in Sri Lanka at the 3 5-star hotels that came under the attack. Similar to the past 3 years, Sri Lankans once again got together to commemorate the innocent victims of the ruthless terrorist attack. In Colombo, St. Anthony's Shrine in Kochikade, which was a target of these attacks, held a special service at 8 a.m. under the patronage of Archbishop of Colombo, His Eminence Malcolm Cardinal Ranjith, and Apostolic Nuncio of the Vatican City, Archbishop Brian Udaiwe. Further, foreign envoys representing countries including China, the United States and UK also joined this special service. At 8:45 p.m., a 2-minute silence was observed to commemorate those who lost their lives due to this tragedy.
The Holy See condemns terrorism in the strongest terms and recalls that terrorism can only be countered by more cohesive measures at the international level. The tragic event of that fateful morning 4 years ago, which caused death and great suffering, is still fresh in the minds of the people, and particularly of the directly affected. We grieve that the truth behind it is still evading us.
Without sticking to the recommendations of the Presidential Commission to probe the Easter Sunday attacks, we request the government and the Attorney General to conduct a detailed investigation by finding the evidence gathered by the CID during the investigations conducted by them until November 2019. We request to include the information gathered by the CID officers who were in charge of these investigations and later transferred by former President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who were elected in 2019, in the new investigation. Further, the reasons to conclude that the information provided by the security forces, police and the intelligence officials and the Indian intelligence on the terror attacks that were planned by Zahra and Hashim by the state officials, including former President Maithripala Sirisena, as less important, needs to be investigated. We ask from the authorities, including the President, on who they are trying to protect by hiding the other volumes of the report prepared by the Easter Commission that comprises evidence despite our official requests to provide copies to us. 2 DNA tests conducted proved that Sarah Jasmine did not die following the clashes of Zahra and Hashim's clan and the security forces. A question arises as to why authorities took steps to conduct another DNA test. Our question is, who ordered a third DNA test? Can those who ordered a third DNA test be the mastermind of the attack who is trying to hide the truth? We inform you that we are on alert until justice is being served.
There is a move in this country in some quarters to try to portray that the Christians have a problem with the Buddhists and that the Christians are harassing Buddhist clergy, very especially in the social media, making negative comments about them and so on. And we are not in favor of any such behavior. We have a very good opinion and relationship with our Buddhist brothers and sisters. Therefore, we will never do anything to harm. We assure that we are brothers and sisters of all our brothers and sisters who are in the Buddhist faith as well as in the Islamic and in the Hindu traditions, that we are all one group of citizens of this country.
Meanwhile, St. Sebastian's Shrine in Katuapitiya in Negombo also held a special service to commemorate the Easter Sunday attack victims. Last evening, the members of the Catholic clergy and the victims who survived from the attack commenced a march to St. Anthony's Shrine in Kochikade, starting from the Katuapitiya church. The members of the march arrived at St. Anthony's Shrine this morning. In a bid towards the government to fulfill justice to the victims of the Easter Sunday attack, the members of public stood beside the Colombo-Negombo main road this morning, between the stretch from St. Anthony's Shrine in Kochikade and St. Sebastian's Shrine in Katuapitiya. In the meantime, Zion Church in Badiklo, which was also target of the suicide bombers, held a special service to commemorate the lives lost on Easter Sunday. Now, MP of the Samagi Janabalawegya, Mujibur Rahman, called on President Ranil Wickremesinghe to issue the volumes the Presidential Commission of Inquiry into the Easter Sunday attacks that was kept back by former President Gotabaya Rajapaksa at the Presidential Secretariat. Adding on to these sentiments, independent MP Partly Champika Ranamaka stated that he believes that those who are involved in the Easter attacks and knew about the attacks continue to walk free. However, on the contrary, MP of the SLPP, SB Dissanayake, pointed out to the lack of importance placed in national security during the good governance regime as the main issue that led to the country being vulnerable to the Easter attacks.
ජනාධිපති කොමිසමේ වාර්තාවල් වෙළුම් 93යි පාර්ලිමේන්තුවට ලබා දුන්නේ. පාර්ලිමේන්තුවට ලබා දුන්න යම්කිසි සාක්ෂිකරුවන්ගේ සටහන් තවත් නොයෙකුත් කරුණු තියෙනවා. ගෝඨාභය රාජපක්ෂ මැතිතුමා ඒක දුන්නේ නැහැ පාර්ලිමේන්තුවට. ඒක එයා ජනාධිපති ලේකම් කාර්යාලයේ තියාගත්තා. ඒ ජනාධිපති ලේකම් කාර්යාලයේ තියාගත්තේ ඒවත් මම හිතනවා දප්පුලද ලිවේරා මැතිතුමා කියවලා තියෙනවා. ඒ කියවපු හින්දා තමයි එයා කියන්නේ මේක කුමන්ත්‍රණයක් කියලා. ඒක අපිට උන්නේ නැහැ. ඒක දැන් රනිල් වික්‍රමසිංහ ජනාධිපතිතුමාට පුළුවන් එළියට දාන්න. ඒ අපි කියනවා ජනාධිපතිතුමාට ඒ ගෝඨාභය රාජපක්ෂ මහත්තයා ඒ නොදීපු කොටස දාන්නකෝ එළියට. එතකොට අපිටත් කියවලා කියන්න පුළුවන් මේක කුමන්ත්‍රණයක්ද නැද්ද කියලා. අපිට බලන්න ආසයි ඒක. ඒ නීතිපතිතුමාව ගේනවා ත්‍රස්ත විමර්ශන අංශයට ගෙනල්ලා එයාගෙන් කට උත්තරයක් ගන්න. එයාගෙන් කට උත්තරයක් ගන්න දෙයක් නෙමෙයි. එයා කුමන්ත්‍රණයක් කියලා එයා කරපු ඒ කරුණු කාරණා අරහා පරීක්ෂණ ආරම්භන්න.
නොයිසෙදිච්ච ප්‍රශ්න 4ක් මේ පාස්කු ප්‍රහාරය ගැන තියෙනවා. ඉතින් ඒක විශේෂයෙන්ම සහරාම් හෂීම් කවුද කියන ගැටලුව ඔහු හා ඉන්දියාවේ සිට ක්‍රියාත්මක වෙච්ච අබු හින්ද් කියන මෞලවිවරයා අතර තිබිච්ච සම්බන්ධය කුමක්ද? විශේෂයෙන්ම හමුදා බුද්ධ්‍යංශ මේ තෞහිද් ජමාත් ව්‍යාපාරය පෝෂණය කළේ ඇයි කියන ගැටලුව. ඒ වගේම 2010 දී පූනේ ජර්මන් බේකරි සිදුවෙච්ච පිපිරීම, ඩකා නගරයේ 2016 දී සිදුවෙච්ච පිපිරීමට බොහෝ සෙයින් සමානයි ශැංග්‍රීලා ඇතුළු හෝටල්වල සිදුවෙච්ච පිපිරීම. ඒවා අධ්‍යයනය කළේ නැද්ද අපේ බුද්ධ්‍යංශ කියන එක? මේ අවසානටම දීපු මේ අනතුරු ඇඟීම කොහොමද ගණන් නොගත්තේ කියන ගැටලුව. ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ හමුදා බුද්ධ්‍යංශ තෞහිද් ජමාත් ව්‍යාපාරය පෝෂණය කළායයි කියලා හැම පැත්තෙම නැගෙන චෝදනාව ගැන නිශ්චිත පිළිතුරක් අද මේ වෙනකන් දීලා නැහැ. ඒකට ශ්‍රී ලංකා රජය පැහැදිලි පිළිතුරක් ලබා දිය යුතුයි. අපට තේරෙන විදිහට නම් තාමත් මේ පසුපස හිටපු මේ ගැන දැනගෙන හිටපු පිරිස් නිදැල්ලේ.
පාස්කු ප්‍රහාරය ආවේ යහපාලන ආණ්ඩුව ඇතුලේ තිබුණු අනාරක්ෂිත තත්ත්වය නිසා. ඒකට අපේ ජනාධිපතිතුමත් වක් කියන්න ඕන. ඒ කාලේ හිටපු ජනාධිපතිතුමත් වක් කියන්න ඕන. හැබැයි ඇත්ත දේ තමයි ඒ වෙලාවේ ආරක්ෂක මණ්ඩලයේ වැදගත්කම පිළිබඳව ජනාධිපති මෛත්‍රීපාල සිරිසේන මැතිතුමා දැනුවත්ව හිටියේ නෑ. මම හොයාගත්ත තොරතුරු අනුව ඉන්දියාව හොයාගත්ත තොරතුරු අනුව මම අධ්‍යයනය කරපු කාරණා අනුව ඇත්තටම ISIS සංවිධානයට අවශ්‍ය වෙලා තිබ්බේ නවසීලන්තේ පල්ලි කීපයකට පහර දීම. අර වෙඩි තැබීම උඩ ඔහුන්ට කොහේ හරි තැනකට පහර දෙන්න. කාබුල් නගරයට පහර දෙන්න එතන නවසීලන්ත හමුදාවත් හිටියා. ඒකත් බැරි නම් එලා ඊළඟට හිතා හිටියේ කාශ්මීර බෝඩරේට ගහන්න. එක්ක හිතාගෙන හිටියේ. හැබැයි ඒ අතර පෙනුණා මෙතන පාළු සුසාන භූමියක් තියෙනවා.
Now, some of Sri Lanka's biggest lenders have warned that the restructuring process of the island nation's local debt will lead to a capital impairment of the banking sector. Speaking to foreign media outlets, the lenders said that while the banking sector is already taking a toll from the haircuts on dollar bonds, the only way to push through the debt overhaul would be to restructure bonds held by Sri Lanka's superannuation funds. The Bloomberg reported that Sri Lanka's plan for a voluntary restructuring of its domestic debt is finding few takers from local banks worried about a hit to their capital, raising the risk of a delay in the country's financial rescue. Some of the nation's biggest lenders warn that a local debt restructuring will lead to a capital impairment, as banks are forced to set aside more money to cover losses. CEO at one of the banks said that the banking sector is already taking a toll on haircuts on dollar bonds. He added that for liquidity and statutory reasons, we have to find some bills and bonds, and went on to say that if that is also going to be subject to a haircut, then the industry might lose its resilience. The Bloomberg article went on to say that the reluctance of banks to participate in a domestic debt restructuring could complicate the process, which authorities hope to conclude before the first IMF review started for September. The article went on to say that authorities agreed to include local currency bonds in the restructuring program as they sought to appease overseas investors who are demanding that domestic debt holders should also share billions of dollars of losses. According to the IMF, Sri Lanka's external borrowings totaled $41 billion, while its local currency debt stood at about $38 billion in 2022. Officials speaking to Bloomberg said that only treasury bills held by the central bank, which owns about 2/3 of the nation's around $11.4 billion in the securities, are currently included in the debt treatment. Sri Lanka also has $24 billion worth of T-bonds, most of which are held by domestic banks and local retirement funds and are subject to voluntary restructuring. The chief executive of an investment bank stated that one way to push through the debt overhaul would be a restructure of bonds held by the nation's superannuation funds, provided their cash flow can be serviced. She added that that would have the least economic impact while offering a big effect on reducing the nation's gross financing needs as per the IMF parameters. Now, the United Nations Population Fund of Sri Lanka plans to implement a new project called Ensure that would ensure access to life-saving sexual and reproductive health and providing gender-based violence prevention and response services for women, girls and vulnerable groups with funding from the government of Japan. The main objective of the project is to protect those severely affected by the breakdown of the economy and protracted socio-economic crisis.
Issuing a statement, the Embassy of Japan in Colombo stated that the project carries a worth of $4.6 million and will provide mobile clinic services and essential commodities such as hygiene kits to women, girls and vulnerable groups affected by the current crisis in Sri Lanka. In order to implement the project, the UNFPA and the Government of Japan in Sri Lanka will work closely with the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Women and Child Affairs and Social Empowerment and partners from government and non-government organizations. The project aims to provide aid for 3 million women, girls and youth in 7 districts in 5 provinces, including northern, eastern and central provinces. According to the embassy, the targeted districts were identified by using the district-level poverty rate and incident rate of violence by intimate partner. The main objective of the project is to protect those severely affected by the breakdown of the economy and protracted socio-economic crisis. The ambassador of Japan to Sri Lanka, Mitsukoshi Hideyoki, meanwhile stressed the importance of protecting women and girls, especially in vulnerable communities in the rural areas, where the access to health services has been a challenge for the local people due to the price hike and income reduction. The ambassador also reiterated Japan's strong commitment to continue the support for women's health and protection of women and girls as a sincere friend of Sri Lanka. In 2022, the Humanitarian Needs and Priorities Plan 2022 estimated that 5.7 million people in Sri Lanka are in need of immediate humanitarian assistance, with over 4.9 million being food insecure.
Now, the Supreme Court has decided to confidentially deliver its verdict to the Speaker of Parliament pertaining to the compliance of the Penal Code Amendment Bill tabled in Parliament by MP Premanath Dolawatha with the Constitution of Sri Lanka. The court announced its decision this morning after concluding the hearing of a petition filed against the proposed bill before a 3-judge member bench of the Supreme Court. Accordingly, the court ordered that all written submissions pertaining to the petition in question be filed on or before the 24th of April. A petition was filed by several people, including a retired army brigadier, seeking an order for the Penal Code Amendment Bill, if passed, to require a 2/3 majority vote in the Parliament and also a referendum to be approved. The petitioners alleged that the relevant bill, tabled as a private member's bill, attempted to interpret homosexuality as a non-criminal offence while promoting such activities. The petition also mentioned that it is contrary to the expectations of the legislature regarding the penal code and thereby seriously violating the provisions of the Constitution, adding that certain provisions of the bill in question are also against religious beliefs. And we'll be back with more news right after this short commercial break.
ගොඩමඩ පෙරලි කරන බලපුළුවන් කාරයා මහින්ද්‍රා යුවෝ ටීමෝ වෙතින්. වැඩම ගොඩයි ගොඩම තමයි. ස්වරාජ් ට්‍රැක්ටර් ටීමෝ වෙතින්. මේ අලුත් අවුරුද්දේ හිත පිරෙන ගනුදෙනුවකට හොඳම තැන හිත ගිය තැන බැංකුව HNB.
ශක්තිමත් මෙන්ම විශාලතම රාජ්‍ය රක්ෂණ ආයතනයක් වීම අපට මහත් අභිමානයක්. වසර 60කට අධික විශිෂ්ටත්වය, රුපියල් බිලියන 274.6ක වත්කම්, 190කට අධික ශාඛාජාලය, රුපියල් බිලියන 158ක ජීවිත රක්ෂණ අරමුදලක්. ශ්‍රී ලංකා ඉන්ෂුරන්ස්.
Welcome back. Now, President Ranil Wickremesinghe says that the government aims to develop Sri Lanka as both an air and sea hub by taking the potential developments in the countries in the Indian Ocean region into account. He made the comments while addressing an event to brief the development of the Colombo Port North project. Meanwhile, Minister of Ports, Shipping and Aviation Nimal Siripala de Silva said that the Colombo North Port Development Project will make Sri Lanka a giant in the maritime industry while rebuilding the country's economy.
An event to brief the North Port development of Colombo Port was held in Colombo this evening under the patronage of President Ranil Wickremesinghe.
The Port of Colombo now handling 7 million TEUs a year. Our intention and our vision is that with the present development going on in the port, to increase it to 1.5 million TEUs a year. SLPA signed an agreement, investment agreement with China merchants and Sri Lankan entrepreneur to establish Art of Center, logistics center in the port of Colombo at the cost of $400 million. I am happy to say that government was able to attract this investment. This has been hanging over for last 5 years. The concept of North Port development was germinated in the mind of His Excellency Ranil Wickremesinghe at that time. You foresaw that at certain point our port will become saturated. So how to cater for the demand that will be created in the world and in the maritime industry? So the idea of the North Port development is that we can't shift to the south. My persistent view is that this port must be a privately managed port. But of course, the Port Authority should be a regulator and an investor. I am happy to note that I was briefed by the consultants appointed by the ADB that this project is financially viable, technically feasible to make Sri Lanka a giant in the maritime industry as well as to rebuild the Sri Lankan economy. Certainly, North Port development will help us a lot.
This ministry is now called the Ministry of Shipping and Aviation. Some people have asked me, why don't we split and have two ministries, one for shipping and one for aviation? And I said no. Our intention is to make Sri Lanka an ARC hub. So we will have one Ministry of Shipping and Aviation. Sri Lanka has to think of the future. What we will do in the next 25 years. How are we going ahead to make this a developed country? We have to look at the developments in India, in Bangladesh, in Iran, the total Makaran coast, in assessing the role that Sri Lanka has to play as a hub. That is important. In the next 25 years, there will be vast developments on the Bay of Bengal, both on the Indian side, the Bangladeshi side, Malaysia, and even Myanmar. So we have to look at the Trincomalee port, also its capacity to be a point for cruise tourism in the Bay of Bengal. In Hambantota, at the moment, we have the port functioning, not at its full capacity, but the developments in Hambantota in the next 10-15 years, where about 4,000 acres will be set aside just for India manufacturing, and the fact that there's going to be at least one refinery means that the activities there will increase. We have the airports which we are developing, Katunayaka Airport which has to be further developed, Mattal Airport which has to be commercially viable. Then with those two airports, we've just opened up Palali and development of Hinguragoda as the main domestic airport for the eastern region and the north central province. So within this, it's a role that the North Port has to play. We have to remember one thing only, that what is going to take place in India, what's the development in Pakistan, and what's the development going to be in Iran. Those three will decide the capacity. Sri Lanka's advantage is the port we have. We have to make whatever adjustments we do now to ensure that Sri Lanka becomes the hub of the Indian Ocean. We can do it.
Now, according to the Department of Census and Statistics, Sri Lanka's National Consumer Price Index declined to 49.2% in March. The Department of Census and Statistics revealed in its latest report that the National Consumer Price Index for the month of March 2023 was recorded at 49.2% as measured by the year-on-year change. This is a slight decrease in comparison to the headline inflation of 53.6% recorded in February 2023. Compared to March 2022, the reported inflation for the month of March 2023 was mainly due to the higher price levels prevailed in both food and non-food groups. On a monthly basis, the year-on-year inflation of the food group decreased to 42.3% in March 2023 from 49% in February 2023. The year-on-year inflation of the non-food group meanwhile dropped to 54.9% in March from 57.4% in February. The contributions to the inflation recorded in March from the food group and non-food group stood at 18.92% and 30.28% respectively in comparison to March 2022. The NCPI for all items for the month of March 2023 is 204.8, representing an increase of 0.7 index points compared to February 2023, during which the index was 204.1. The increase represents the rise in expenditure value of ₹375.71 in the market basket. The Sri Lankan shares closed lower today, dragged by industrial and financial sector stocks. The CSE All Share Price Index fell 0.2% to 9,260.41, marking a fifth straight session of losses. Trading volume for the CSE All Share Price Index rose to 59.3 million shares from 42.9 million in the previous session. The equity market's turnover rose to 966.8 million Sri Lankan rupees from 933.5 million rupees in the previous session. Foreign investors brought stocks worth 311.5 million rupees on a net basis, while domestic investors were net sellers, offloading shares worth 883.3 million rupees. Now let's take a look at how the Sri Lankan rupee traded against other major currencies during the day. Now, oil prices were on track for a hefty weekly loss as economic and interest rate uncertainty weighed through. Prices were stable today as the Eurozone recovery gathered pace unexpectedly. Meanwhile, data released yesterday showed that US weekly jobless claims rose last week, raising fears of a recession and a lower fuel demand from the world's biggest oil consumer. Brent futures for June delivery rose by 0.14% to end at $81.21 a barrel. Meanwhile, US West Texas Intermediate crude for June delivery was up by 0.17% and settled at $77.50. Both benchmarks had slid by more than 2% yesterday to their lowest since the unexpected announcement in early April of production cuts by some OPEC countries and remain on track for a weekly drop of about 6%. Losses in today's early trading reversed after news that the Eurozone economic recovery gathered pace this month. Further, analysts claim that oil prices could be supported by draws from inventories from next month owing to producer group OPEC Plus reduced output targets and accelerating Chinese demand. And that's all the news we have for you this evening. Join us again tomorrow for the very latest news at the very same time. Have a pleasant evening and good night.